So, this week you're going to learn about the communication processes as it relates to group and team dynamics. I want you to think, would you consider yourself a good communicator? Why or why not? What are those specific skills, characteristics that are needed to be a good communicator? And if you're like me, when you think of a good communicator, you're thinking, I know this person, or this person on TV seems to be like a good communicator. And here's why. Does communication translate into virtual communication? Are there differences in those skill sets? We have a couple videos in our module that I would encourage you to take a look at. They're humorous, but they also shed a light into what it means to be a good communicator and how that sometimes does or doesn't translate into virtual communication. If you think about it, communication, if it's stripped down to its most basic premise, it's a message that is sent from point A to point B. And if it's communication with dialogue, that message is sent back from point A to point B, to point B to point A. And we rely on certain delivery methods for communication. So I'm communicating to you right now verbally. But we all know that communication exceeds simple verbal communication. And sometimes we can take great context away from a message through nonverbal communication. So in 2020, I think about the communication that was given during the COVID-19 pandemic. What we did here in Kentucky as a state to keep people informed daily, regularly, at the same time. How specific points of that message were targeted toward different groups of people. There were sections during the governor's daily address just for children, just for the elderly, for the medical community, for business owners. And we got to see what effective communication looks like, and then we got to see what ineffective communication looks like. There were even some states who had very few public addresses. But not only the visual and the verbal part, also the symbolic piece. If you think about it, there were taglines and hashtags and websites that and sayings. For example, if you were in Kentucky, you knew that a regular saying at this particular time was healthy at home or Team Kentucky. We're all in this together. The symbolism of those messages communicated regularly by people within the state as well as political leaders gave a sense of solidarity. This week you'll learn about emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is us being able to extrapolate that intrapersonal piece, who we are. And based off of who we are, how does it affect our communication with other people? And then we have nonverbal communication. You'll learn about nonverbal communication this week. You'll learn about micro expressions. Can you identify micro expressions as easily through virtual communication versus in-personal communication? Do you look for micro expressions? Sometimes it's more difficult to hide those in a Zoom meeting. But it may be much easier to hide those in, say, a telephone meeting or where your face is not shown. The change in our voice, the change in how we inflect certain words is an indication of our communication. For example, depending on where you are in the United States or where you originate from, you may say you differently. Or you may use a different word for Coca-Cola, soda, pop. As we work in groups, it's important to think about the complexities of our communication with one another. And you will learn about background factors. How do those background factors impact how we communicate? Are we intentional about getting our point across? Are we passive aggressive? Maybe we're unintentional, intentional. I encourage you to pause the video and participate in this activity. So, your book talks about explicit and implicit, rejection and acceptance. You may not have noticed that depending on the words you use and your response to others' communication, you may be sending a signal of rejection or acceptance. I've worked with people before that presented a gap between what they communicated and what was actually received. People who maybe start their message in the middle, or people who desire to state this, but because of the words that they use or the way that they deliver their message, their clear intention isn't communicated. And that may be you. I know that I am not always an effective communicator. There are things that I can improve about my communication style. And so that's when people in our lives really share as a valuable resource in helping us to communicate. Because they're trusted. They can tell us what needs to be improved on. I love that quote Tubbs uses. People don't listen, they reload. So often when we're speaking, we'll listen to the first 5-10 seconds of what someone says, and then quickly we are ready to say what we want to say. Listening is such an important piece of the communication processes in groups. Are you allowing yourself to listen to the other people in your group? I encourage you to pause the video and participate in this activity. The only way you can be an active listener is if you're truly interested. Take time and remove those distractions. Based off of your body language, are you sending the signal, a nonverbal signal, that you are there and ready to listen? Avoid that temptation of wanting to interrupt. Listen to their entire message. Clarifying statements are so important when you provide feedback. It shows the one who is sending the message that you are there and you are listening actively. Now, guys, for number 6, this is tough for us. But don't offer to fix the problem unless it's asked of you. Our significant other, they tend to just want someone to listen. And so I've included one more activity. If you know someone you'd like to participate in this activity with, I encourage you to do so. It's probably a little tougher than you would think to not speak for 45 seconds and be able to repeat what was said to you. But it's fun. I hope you enjoy the chapter on communication processes.